Teachers of Reddit. What is something a student of yours has said that made you think, wow, there's no hope left for you? Story 1 of a second grade teacher. I have a boy who lies constantly about anything. He was on camera, watching the footage of himself punching a student in the face, and he crossed his arms and said, if I didn't do it, then I didn't do it. The worst part is mom believes every word he says and attacks the school for making him accountable for his actions. He's going to do something as an adult and go to jail. When they pull him away, I know he's going to be yelling, if I didn't do it, I didn't do it. Story 2 on Friday, a girl told me that she and her mother were walking down the street behind an old man. The old man reached into his pocket for something, and all his money fell onto the sidewalk. She and her mother ran and picked it all up when the old man tried to take it back from them. They told him it was their money, and to go to... Story 3, my wife told me this story about a time. She was lecturing a kid on why he should try to do well in school. She asked him what he wanted to be when he grows up. His response, I want to be in jail. That's where my dad and uncle is. She had no response. Probably the only time in her career that she was left speechless by a student. Story 4, I had a senior say, she didn't think it was fair. I've grown to hate that word BTW, that my exams use short answer questions instead of multiple choice. She said some of us just aren't good writers. I responded that if you're a senior in college and can't string a few sentences together, something has gone wrong. She stormed out of class. Story 5, I ain't doing any of that. My mom already said she's signing the papers to drop out. As soon as I turn 16, Ed and I know that many people often drop out and end up going back to get a GED. I sincerely hope this young man turns his life around. He's had an incredibly tough upbringing and, along with that, a history of violent conduct in and out of school. I tried my best to remain patient with him in my room and to motivate him any way I could. At the point he said those words, I just don't think there was anything more I could do. That was last year, and he hasn't been back to school this year. I really hope that at some point he figures things out and gets his life going in a positive direction, whatever that may be. Story 6, I want to be a drug dealer, but the cool kind. You know, the ones that wear a suit and carry a briefcase. He was 17 at the time and completely serious. He was expelled a month later for jumping another student. Story 7, I had one student at a bilingual school in Mexico who, after being at this school and supposedly learning English for 5 years, still couldn't speak it and barely tried to make any effort to learn anything, didn't do assignments, and failed almost every test. When we mentioned it to her parents, their attitude was that she doesn't really need it because she will just marry someone who will take care of everything for her. My thought was, who would want to marry someone who doesn't know anything and makes no effort? Story 8, kid, totally serious and going to drop out. He'll make money off of YouTube. Me, how many views are your videos getting? Kid, I have 4 subscribers, so I just need a few more. Story 9, incident number 1, can we just not learn this? It's hard, we should just skip it. Incident number 2, I don't have to get good grades. My grandfather owns a house, and when he dies, my family's going to sell it for $1 million, so I won't have to ever get a job. Story 10, a girl, 8th grade, told me she wanted to have kids 2 to 3 by the time she was 18, so she could have the energy to keep up with them and then be a stripper to support them. Story 11, I work an alternative school for kids kicked out of public school for severe emotional and behavioral issues. A lot of them are going to require government services for the rest of their lives. There's usually not just one thing they say, but we know that they will never have normal lives. It's a little disheartening to hear a 6-year-old scream that he's going to kill you, especially when you were playing tag not 5 minutes before. There's a young boy who could be very sweet and is an adorable blonde butterball. However, he has pretty severe behaviors and gets restrained at some point on a daily basis. I saw his parents one day because they live in government-subsidized housing close by and walk him to school. It was 50 degrees out, and the little boy was in a basketball jersey and shorts. His parents looked exactly how I expected them to look and were rude to all the staff they interacted with. It just showed me that no matter how much we do, he spends most of his life with his shitty parents. Having a child with behaviors doesn't inherently make someone a bad parent. But in our program specifically, most of the students come from harsh backgrounds, which either causes or exacerbates their behavior. Story 12, I had a student who was always acting up. I constantly tried talking to him about his behavior, and I wrote plenty of referrals. Throughout all of this, I would email and call his mother, but never got a response. One day, he was pacing around and texting someone. I told him to put his phone away, and he said, I can't. I'm not too happy right now. So I said, will you take it out to the hall, and he'll give you 1 minute. His response really shook me. He said, no, he'll sit down. I just want my mom to turn the water back on. When all you know about a student is what you see in the classroom, it can be easy to forget they may not have a great home life. So I did wonder, is there hope for him? But it also wasn't truly any fault of his own. He just had a home life where he was stricken by poverty. Story 13, I had a student say, I don't need to learn any of this. I want to use it in real life. When I tried to explain why math was going to be useful, he responded, Watch me get rich without even going to school. I mean, sure, it's been done, but probably not the best idea. Story 14, I teach first-year U.S. law students. More than you would care to believe, they don't know America has 3 branches of government, much less what the branches do. Story 15, I had one 4-year-old who couldn't hold a pencil. He couldn't remember how to pick it up and didn't have the strength to push it down hard enough on the paper to get any leverage. He couldn't color, had no motor skills whatsoever. He didn't have a dominant hand. His parents liked to leave him in my learning center for an hour. Even though he couldn't use the bathroom on his own, he was 4 years old and didn't have the slightest grasp of the alphabet and couldn't retain anything we taught him. It took a month to get him to count to 10. My theory on all this is, on top of a learning disability developmental delay his mom was in denial of, he was a natural lefty who was forced to use his right hand, but because of the disability, couldn't, and ended up not developing any motor skills in either hand. Poor kid. Story 16, principal at an inner-city high school. I had to sit down with a student who had been caught plagiarizing for a second time, this time from The Onion. Story 17, university professor here. A student last term never purchased the textbook and thus never did his homework, sat in the back and spaced out all class, failed one exam, and barely passed the other. He came to me during the final week of class to ask me if he could do all of his missed assignments, and then asked why I didn't remind him to do them. Bro, this is university. I'm not chasing after you. Story 18, I taught lower elementary. Most teachers will get frustrated at some point by how hard it can be to get a child who may be lacking upstairs some extra help. This was the case with one of my favorite students. It didn't matter that he couldn't do any of the work that his peers were doing due to his incredibly low IQ. He was performing at his ability level, but he was just so nice to everyone. I had set aside time every day to help him with his reading. We were using the short story of The Ugly Duckling. It had one short sentence on each page, and after 2 weeks, he could get through it with minimal help. However, reading the words isn't all there is to reading. I had asked him if he could tell me what the story was about since we had spent time on it every day for the last 2 weeks. He starts his oral retelling off great, and I'm super excited. This is a huge deal for my man because up until this point, I couldn't get any retell or comprehension out of him. I'm super pumped, and he's feeding off my energy, and he's so proud of himself. This kid is glowing. We are only 34 through the story, though. We come up to the end of The Ugly Ducking, and he's telling me that the duckling changes this word took is forever to say, much less read, but then he stops and goes into this deep think stage. I prod him a little bit. He changes. What does he change in a bud? He brings his eyes back from the ceiling, and then with the biggest smile, he shouts out a butterfly. Story 19, I asked my students what they could have done to better prepare themselves for their exam. One responded with, you should have told me to revise better. The revision sheets, and this is real IEI, important wasn't enough apparently. Story 20, not a teacher, but worked at a school for a while. Had a 4th grader say that he didn't need school because he was going to have a wife and she would do everything. Same student, while disrupting the entire class, also said, what are you going to do? I know you can't hit me. Story 21, I once had a student who didn't know what the answer to 55 was. This was in the preparatory year of a private medical university. Fear for the patients if he ever graduates. Story 22, high school teacher here, dude. If you don't start coming to class and doing the work, you'll fail out of school. School's done nothing for me. I'm going to rap to pay the bills, bro. Kid was an awful musician. Couldn't make a beat. Couldn't write a rhyme to save his life. Story 23, I didn't teach, but I tutor-mentored for a few years. Heard one student say she didn't care about school. Didn't want to go to college because she would just go on welfare. One 6th grader was expelled for behavior. Constantly was kicked out of class, fought dress code violations, including wearing gang colors. Expelled at 13, couldn't multiply, could barely read, can't remember one specific thing he said to make me think he had no hope, but it was pretty depressing. Story 24, it's not what they said, it's what they didn't say. I asked him to read out loud, and he just stared at the paper. I soon found out that he read at a kinder level as a 5th grader, didn't want to put in the work himself. Instead, just waited for someone to read it for him. His comprehension was there, but he wanted everything spoon-fed to him. Story 25, spent 15 minutes on a math lesson. Do examples, hand out worksheet. Do one on a worksheet with them. He asked, so you just want us to fill this in with random numbers? Speechless. Story 26, not a teacher, but a kid in my class tried to explain to the teacher that he doesn't care about school because he'll just live on his parents' money, and told her that he can't buy her because she's a poor. Story 27, during lunch duty at a high school. Had to ask a kid who had a bad rep to move. He pulled over an extra chair to a table, making it so you could not easily get around that area, which was a very clear rule in the school for fire safety reasons. He does, but moves back. I gently remind him again, and say if I see it again, I'd have to write him up. He moves back for about 5 minutes. Then, frustrated he can't hear his friends, looks at me, pulls his chair back to the table, hands me his ID, and says, "I'm going to jail anyways." Took his ID to get his name, which I already knew, said thanks for cooperating, and then left me alone. He was in a fight a month later, had to be taken down by 3 school cops, and taken out of school in cuffs. Edit: all students had the option to go outside, as well for lunch to be able to sit and talk in larger groups. He was offered that option by both his friends and me, and the weather was nice. The rule seemed stupid until when I was a student there and saw a kid have an allergic reaction and struggled to see adults and nurses get to the kid with 300 students, chairs, and tables in the way. Story 28, not a teacher, but my wife had a student in 3rd grade who refused to do any writing assignments. My wife told him that she was going to call his parents to explain to them what was going on if he didn't start doing his work. He said, "I don't care. My mom said I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. Rules don't apply to me." My wife called his mom, and his mom told my wife that she, meaning my wife, just has to understand how her son is, and if he doesn't want to do the work, then he doesn't have to. His behaviors all made sense after that, and it was a very tough year. He stopped doing all work and started harassing other kids, probably partially due to boredom, since he was doing nothing else by the end of the year. As long as he was happy, my wife couldn't get the mom on board. Story 29, there was this kid named Lawrence who was one of those typical wallflower Catholic kids I grew up with. His dad was in our scout troop as a leader and was really meticulous, like everything had to be just so. In the late 70s, most of the troop leaders had a relaxed dress code, but Lawrence's dad dressed like a 1940s scouting manual model, complete with a brown uniform and wide-brimmed hat. Everything was pleated and pressed. His dad drove an old MG Roadster that was constantly breaking down. They were upper class, and mom was not in the picture. But the way Lawrence's dad picked on him was brutal. "Stand up straight, Lawrence. Chin up. Be a good lad. Chest out. Chin up, Lawrence. Don't go over there. It's dirty over there, Lawrence. Stand straight and tall when I address you. Don't be rude. Wait until I have started eating before you start." "Lawrence, do I have to raise my voice, Lawrence?" By high school, Lawrence just gave up. He wasn't perfect enough, so why bother? He stared into space. He attended school in person, only just a blank and hollow shell. His clothing didn't change. It only became dirtier. His hair got long, he lost weight, and his clothes just hung on him. I think the only way to deal with his dad's control issues was passive resistance. By his senior year in high school, he flunked out. Not sure what happened to him after that. Story 30, I teach lots of 7 and 9-year-olds, and quite often ask them to spell their names for me, just so I get it correct for them, Rachel or Rachel, etc. But you wouldn't believe just how many of these children don't have a clue. I appreciate some may be dyslexic, and that's so. I don't expect all of them to know, but just more surprised it's such a high percentage. Edit: I'm only talking about their first names, and the ones that have trouble tend to have simpler names. Story 31, I've got a class of 8th grade students, and we just got a new student. In his first week, he proceeded to grab a female student, but with both hands. I call him up to my desk and ask him if he knows what unwanted touching and assault mean. Without emotion, he says that yes, he does, but he's new, so he needs to make a name for himself. I immediately sent him to the office. The saddest part about this is that the response I got from administration is that the student was spoken to about the situation, and I need to make sure they do not sit near each other. No consequence for assault. You can be assured that something like this will happen again. Story 32, after months of learning about maps and cardinal directions in our grade 9 geography class, is north always the way you're facing? There is no helping you, kid. Edit: I am not a school of the South Pole. Story 33, okay, I need you guys to name some countries for me. Let's make a list. I get a few examples, and then Africa, I proceed to explain the concept of a continent. So wait, Africa is a country inside of country, like Tasmania is a country, but it's in Australia. Please keep in mind that this was a year 11 high school class. Story 34, just this week, I have a student in grade 5 that is pretty oppositional, has a tough home life, etc. He doesn't always try very hard, but sometimes I can see he's trying to put in some effort. We were talking about how I grade them, and he interrupts the conversation with, "I don't care all about my grades." And I thought, here we go, another rant about how unfair school is. I just want to know that I keep getting better. Perfect, I got chills. Edit: okay, I see now that I completely misread that question. Story 35, 2 contenders here. 17-year-old girl who saw birds walking around outside her classroom and said, "Look, that has feet, and so does that one." Also, the 14-year-old boy who asked me whether I'd ever noticed that Dwayne Johnson and The Rock looked really familiar. Story 36, had my year 2 private student try to flip overturn his study table on me. Didn't work. I slammed it down and screamed at me to write out his homework, because that's what his mom pays me for. There's still hope, but it made me so sad and angry as soon as he assumed I was of a lesser position than him, just because I was being paid. Like, bye. Story 37. This is probably going to be buried, but I like to reference this one from time to time. I had a student who was a hoarder. He was one of those kids that we all remember who had the backpack that was filled with everything for every class. It looked like this kid carried around a small grocery cart on his back. One day, I'm walking him to his locker to look for an assignment that I knew that I had given him before, and I smell this nasty smell. Big surprise, it's his locker, open to find 89 cartons of chocolate milk stacked inside. That's not all. On the floor, he had a pretty large mason jar filled with what looked like dead bugs. I asked him why he had so much milk in his locker, and he said stone-faced to dip the bugs and never sure what happened to this kid when he left. But that was the most disturbing for me. Story 38. I'm too late, but for those of you sorting by new, maybe this will give you a chuckle. I was covering cells and organelles, and I was passing around a model of cell that highlighted organelles, what they looked like and where they were. It gets to a girl, and she takes a look at it and says, "What planet is this?" Story 39. Me, what country did the United States gain independence from? Student, Hispanic. Me, Tunisia. That's an ethnicity. Student, nah. It's a country in Africa. Me, internally, Tunisia, year 13. What the me, externally, okay, well, can someone help Tunisia answer the question? Other student, France. Story 40. In a high school psychology class during the unit on drugs and their impact on the brain, I am having students read and discuss an article about the neuroscience behind mixing drugs like Xanax and codeine and lean. Some future frat house dumpster chimes in from the back of the room, unexpectedly, bragging loudly about how she loves getting turned on a mixture of weed, Xans, and Molly, and how it has become her go-to form of intoxication for her and her older boyfriend. Before I can hit her with the standard, hey, psych class is not an episode of intervention-type response. I get this, Jim. My boyfriend can't even get off if he's not on Molly. Do you think it causes brain damage? Story 41. Not a teacher, but still you'll see. High school, so like age 15, one of the bigger kids, like 6 feet, decided head open the window and climb into the classroom. In the process, breaks a window and an arm as he falls in head first, and try to brace the impact with his arm. Story 42. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in 5th grade, there was a guy in my class whose parents were among the more affluent in town and that donated a lot of money to the school in every way they could. They paid for the new computer lab and library renovation. They practically owned the school and staff. This guy could scream at teachers, throw desks, attack classmates, and never get in trouble because his parents had that much power over them. He sent me to the hospital with my first concussion when he spontaneously slammed my head into a locker. I got 3 detentions because his parents decided the story was I had provoked him, and then another 3 when I refused to apologize to him for said provocation. There never was hope for him. I didn't hear much because we moved to a different city to escape that school, but I heard he dropped out of high school, got his GED, then died serving in Iraq because his parents' influence couldn't get him a job outside their hometown. Most people would call him a hero for that, but he wasn't. Story 43. I teach computer science in university. I get a lot of freshmen that pluck the major because they heard it was a high-paying major, but don't actually like the subject. But the worst was a recent student that asked if they could just do the assignments by hand. They didn't want to use a computer. They didn't really like using them. People use computers too much. I don't start doing that. Also thought computers could do too much and wanted people to stop using them. Brah. This is a programming course for computers in a major about making computers do things. You're going to need to use a computer. Needless to say, I told them this wasn't probably the major for them. Story 44. I am not a teacher, but my 12-year-old son told me of an exchange a fellow student of his had with their science teacher, in which the student attested that it was her understanding that the sun was located on the Earth's equator, which is why it is so much warmer there. I can only imagine what must have gone through that poor woman's head hearing that. Story 45. I was doing a get-to-know-you type thing on the first day of school. One of my questions was if you could be anywhere doing anything you wanted, where would you be and what would you be doing? Students' response flatlining in a fiery nuclear holocaust. Story 46. The students where I teach are challenging. It's a rural community of about 2,500 people, lots of troubles at home, and about 95 of all the students straight up don't give a. One girl was on her 4th attempt at Science 10 and was again getting 0 because she does nothing and rarely shows up. She was in my class again this year, but she decided to do adult basic instead because she will be 18 soon. She failed that too. Another girl gets high every lunch and comes to class blitzed out of her skull, just staring blankly at the paper, called her parents, but it turned out it was them who smoked pot with her that lunch hour. What do you know? One teacher here is severely allergic to perfume. One kid brought some to school and sprayed in her face. She was in the hospital for almost a week, barely able to breathe through her or trachea. Same kid called her on her first day back. Monday will be fun. Story 47. I was doing a presentation on the AIDS crisis in India for my 10th grade history class. I asked the class what they thought the government could do to help those afflicted send all the people with AIDS to fight for us in Iraq. She was completely serious and is now an RN at a world-renowned teaching hospital. I laughed out loud and still got an A. Story 48 emailed me to set up a parent-teacher conference between me and his mom to discuss his class performance and grades. Used his personal email address, XXDonorKing420XX. This was a university student. Story 49 had one teen girl claim her 5-year-old brother was abused by his classmates in the toilet. We investigated it completely. There was no abuse. Teen girl demanded we call the police on the other little kid. Then didn't believe that thing happened be the kid is well below the age of criminal responsibility. See if the kid did do something. We'll be looking at their family, since that type of behavior can mean abuse at home. So what the story was that the young boys were in the toilet. The other boy was knocking on the boy in the toilet's door, telling him to hurry up. Story 50 when a kid expressed his love for hot dog on a cob. It was a corn dog, edit not a teacher, but I asked the teacher, edit 2 misredacted, said the child was 10 years old at the time the comment was made. Edit 3 the child is a 10-year-old inner city boy. He also asked what a justice frog is after we said the Pledge of Allegiance. Edit 4 kid might be the next Einstein, for all I know. I just thought it was funny. Story 51 when I first started teaching at this one community college, I created some group problems, and one was a challenge problem. A girl said that she would drop if the class was going to be this hard and stayed afterwards for a little to patronize me on how to teach. I appreciate wanting to hear more examples, but to be told we don't do things that way, hear my mouth hit the floor, being a younger teacher is not fun. Story 52, I once had a student that was telling me about a camping trip he just got back from. He said that while he was in the woods, he found a tick on him. It was filled with blood. He then proceeded to tell me that he got the tick, threw it into a frying pan, and ate it. He said protein. That's when I realized there was no chancing for this kid. I still shake my head when I think about it. Story 53, my brother teaches junior high in a very small, rural, low-income community. As a new teacher, he basically got the special math classes the other teachers wouldn't take. My favorite story, apparently it was a very naive move on his part to let them choose their own seats at the beginning. After the second week, he made a seating chart. It didn't go over well, and he told his students if they didn't like it to write him a note with where they'd like to sit, fold it up, and put in the trash can. By the end of the day, apparently there were 10 or so neatly folded suggestions in his trash can. Story 54, not a teacher, but some girl asked me to do her homework for her because she said she was pretty. She doesn't do anything in school and gets others to do her work. There are many girls like her in my school, and I'm worried about the future. Story 55, I'm a tutor for athletes at university. Most of them are all right, good enough students, but they have so many scaffolds, tutors, mentors, and a team of adults creating their entire schedules all the way down to when they eat, study, and sleep that sometimes they think they're not responsible for any of it. They don't know when their own exams are. They usually ask me, I'm a tutor, not a scheduler. They always walk into the tutoring session asking, what are we doing today? And that's not how it works. They need to tell me what they need help with. Otherwise, I have no idea what chapter they're in or what they're doing in class. I'm not allowed to be in contact with their professors or TAs. That's their job. A lot of them are clearly only there to play football. Some have even told me as much and only want to pass their classes for this reason. They're not thinking about careers outside the NFL. The worst part is most of this is the fault of the school. The school gives them so many scaffolds so they can keep their star athletes who would otherwise fail out their first semester. The school wants them to focus on football instead of classes because they bring in money. They have study halls where the athletes walk in and are handed a sheet detailing what assignments they need to finish that day and sit next to mentors who make sure they actually get finished. No wonder they ask me what to do. As a student who is not an athlete, it actually makes me angry thinking how easy college would be if I had all those scaffolds. But the university is basically setting them up for failure. If they don't go on to play in the NFL, who's going to hire them? Edit, I feel like I should mention, this is not all the athletes. And not even all the football players, though. They tend to be the biggest culprits. I usually run into this problem when the athlete himself didn't request to tutor me, but a mentor or supervisor did after they got a bad grade. Sometimes they don't even know they're getting a tutor until I show up. The whole thing is terribly mismanaged, but in particular if they need a tutor but don't want one, it's indicative of this larger issue. But if students request a tutor themselves, they're usually much more competent individuals. Story 56, not a teacher, but some guy I know dropped out of school at the age of like 12 because he was bullied. Note, I don't believe that to be the cause. He then spent the next 8 years chain smoking in his nan's front room, playing computer games and smoking weed, drinking. Now at the age of 16, he was eligible for some benefits from the government, but he even then was too lazy to just go down the job center and get someone to fill in the forms for him if he fakes dyslexia. He could read-write fine, could do basic maths no problem, and was very street smart, so even free money couldn't tempt him to get out of the house. Eventually, I landed him a manual labor gig in which he lasted 2 weeks going home early because it was too hard, and then got fired. A few months pass, and he gets a gig, a local off-license owned by a friend's parents. Gets fired because he was asked to dispose of some cardboard boxes by ripping them up and putting them in the recycle container. Boss comes back at the end of the day to find that he has literally sat there and torn half a box up by hand into tiny squares. Gets fired on the spot. A couple more years pass, and this time another friend hooks him up in a care home where he does night shifts. Suits him fine, as all he does is minor requests for the people there. As far as I know, he's still employed there, and I suppose the moral of the story is even if you think there's no hope for some people, all they really need is the right environment to do what is needed, and that's it. He's an alright guy, okay friend, but honestly I can't help to feel like he has so much wasted potential at something. Still wondering if he'll stick with that job, or just sack it. But honestly, I sincerely hope that the better side of humanity prevails here, and he keeps working at something. Story 57, he didn't say anything, because he is mostly nonverbal and he has Down syndrome. He had been bounced around so many foster homes, and had very obviously been abused at some point. His behavior was scary, and if he had been in my class longer than a few months, he probably would have qualified for the therapeutic campus. He never stayed long enough in one spot to get the help he needed. So I don't say this to make it out to be his fault, because the fault is with his bio parents and the foster system. I hope he's okay now, but I don't have high hopes for him ever having a normal life. Story 58, Oi. How to state this, I work with autistic elementary students, primarily nonverbal or lower functioning. Now, in one hand, you could say they're not going to change just on the state of their disorder. However, you'd be surprised the amount of personality present and how their environment and parents can have an effect on their behavior. So I work with one kid closely. I love the little brat dearly. He is probably our most verbal student and talks in a very squeaky voice. He is always quoting or saying something in his own head, often from television shows, and sometimes it is the cutest thing. However, for a long time, he's been a brat. And trying to go to class, we could not get him to sit down and do one problem without him fighting us to get up and run around the room like a madman. If we tried to get him to do his work or send him a timeout, which we call break, he would get frustrated and start screaming or crying, kind of disruptive to the class as a whole. So we implemented a structured way of doing things, very basic, 2 minutes of work, 2 minutes of play. If you don't do your work, yell or scream, then you take a 2-minute break in the corner. As you can imagine, this didn't go so well at first. Literally fought the kid for 2 to 3 weeks over this concept, and he spent plenty of days doing no work and all his time in the corner screaming his brains out. After that, he started to get it, and guess what? He is usually our star student. I said usually, though, and here are a few things I found interesting and relevant to the parent thing a lot of commenters have been talking about. One, during that initial period, there was a moment in break where he was just sobbing and crying and couldn't pull himself together. Snot was coming out his nose, and he asked, "I need a tissue." So I got him a tissue, and when I brought it to him, he leaned forward as if for me to wipe his nose for him. I said, "No, you can do this yourself," to which he responded with an even louder shriek, and even more crying ensued. It was readily apparent that this was something he was used to at home. He was used to literally getting everything he wanted, hand over foot, at home, to the point where mom was wiping his nose for him. 2, any period of break from school, a weekend, winter vacation, etc., we would see a lot of these behaviors come back. It was literally like a reset, and we would once again have to spend more time in break than usual to kick those habits back out. Clearly, things at home are run vastly different than at school. 3, a lot of what he quotes in his babble reflects what comes from home. You can imagine the stuff coming from an abused parent similar to what I experience. Luckily for me, it's not a lot of swearing. However, when the child gets frustrated, starts saying things like "shut the door" and whatever other meddlesome language you can imagine angry parents might yell, it is a little disheartening. I love the children I work with, but when you hear and see this stuff, you just wish there was a lot more you could do at home. I'm sure this kid has a bright future for his level. He may even make it to be independent enough to live on his own. However, I still wish I could do more for him.